CEO of the World Affairs Councils of America, and I'm pleased to welcome you to day two, evening two of WACA's 2020 National Conference, New Frontiers in Diplomacy and National Security. We are delighted tonight to present a keynote conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. And before I introduce our speakers for this fireside chat, I want to thank a number of people. First and foremost, our new chair, Glenn Creamer, also the WACA National Board of Directors, of course, the National Office, our dedicated staff of Liz Brailsford and Laura Duncan, who are doing such great work behind the scenes to present this conference to you all week long, and our sponsors. We couldn't do the event without this. We wish we could be with you live in person at the Mayflower Hotel, but this year it's all virtual, and so far, so good. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Jenna Ben-Yehuda, who is President and CEO of the Truman National Security Project and the Truman Center for National Policy. Jenna is also founder of the Women's Foreign Policy Network, a global membership organization of 5,000 national security professionals in 100 countries. A former State Department official with private sector experience, Jenna is a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Futures Council on U.S. National Security and a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations. She also serves on the advisory boards of the National Security Action and the Leadership Council for Women in National Security. I am grateful to Jenna, not only for participating in this fireside chat, but also for assisting WACA in its invitation to our featured speaker, Alexander Vindman, Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army retired. Colonel Vindman's long history of military service came into the spotlight late last year when he testified during President Donald Trump's impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives. At the time, he was the director for Eastern European, Caucasus, and Russian affairs at the National Security Council. Colonel Vindman began his military career in 1998 when he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. In 2003, he was deployed to Iraq, where he assumed a commanding position. He later received a Purple Heart Medal for wounds he incurred there. Starting in 2008, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman began specializing in the Russian, Eastern European, and Central Asian regions, including serving as an Army Foreign Area Officer and completing a master's degree at Harvard. From 2012 to 2015, he served as Assistant Army Attaché in Moscow and then as the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Politico-Military Advisor for Russia. He was assigned to the NSC in 2018. Before his retirement, he was selected for Army War College and promotion to colonel. But he was ousted, as you know, from his job in February by a certain vindictive leader who, just days ago after losing the election, fired the Secretary of Defense and replaced Pentagon officials with loyalists. Polls have consistently shown that the U.S. military is the most publicly trusted among our government institutions. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Vindman represented why that is so during his career in uniform, and so he does today. His forthcoming memoir is on the ethics he values. Here, right matters. Jenna, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the World Affairs Council's National Conference.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that warm welcome. We are so pleased to be here with you tonight. I wish we were all together at the Mayflower, as has been WACA tradition for the last few years, and hope that 2021 will bring that experience again for us all. Alex, it's wonderful to see you again, and welcome.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Bill, for allowing me to participate in this WACA forum.
Well, Alex, it's, the last time we saw each other was in October when you accepted Truman Center's first award for exceptional moral courage in public service. That feels like a lifetime ago. It was before the election, and it was really just in the first couple of months as you entered civilian life. As you noted, 21 years, 6 months, and 10 days of military service. So as we begin our conversation this evening, I'd like to ask you to reflect on the last year in your personal life, and then as we consider now that we're on the other side of what is a clear Biden victory, do you see that as some vindication that right matters? Have those principles prevailed?
Sure. So maybe that I'll start with the latter and move on to what the last year has been like. I think the way I guess I view Here Right Matters, the kind of the words that I ended my monologue with Representative Maloney during my public testimony. I viewed that as kind of a more than just a superficial notion of, it matters either for me personally, which it did, that my values were being challenged, or that it mattered for the United States in that context of a monumental, momentous impeachment hearing and forthcoming Senate trial. It also matters for the United States because this country is different, and the kind of the values and principles that I certainly most keenly appreciate about this country and embody in military service warranted those kind, me doing my duty, living up to my oath, and delivering factual testimony to the House committees. This last year has been pretty interesting. About this time, really I think this Thursday would make it exactly a year, is when I testified in those open hearings. Heading into those open hearings, I had already kind of started to emerge as a public figure, although it was the only statement that was authentic in mine was what had been leaked as the opening testimony or opening statement to my closed-door testimony. So that was my first kind of, the fact that I used my own voice, my own words. But even so, there were a lot of questions about who I was. Certainly, the Fox News of the world, the Fox News of the world, and the president's partisans attempted to paint me as some sort of nefarious character. And then on the other hand, I had my record of service and had the benefit of serving with some really well-regarded individuals. Chairman Dunford, on his last day in uniform, actually was kind enough to sing my praises, which I'm grateful for. And then the next thing was, the public testimony and the enormous amount of coverage. Frankly, nobody expected it. We didn't expect, we couldn't have expected that I was going to generate so much attention and frankly garner as much attention as I did from the president. There were a number of different public servants, but the president seemed to be focused on me. And that continued on through, the subsequent months, trying to continue to serve in the White House, do my job, in spite of the fact that I was, I was receiving a great deal of skepticism from the political leadership, and then on through my dismissal from the National Security Council, trying to figure out whether I still had a military career. I'll hold on how I made some of those decisions, I guess, for a subsequent question. But it has been a really. It's been a challenging year where I learned something about myself, my family, the American people, the enormous amount of support I received from the public, thousands of letters of support, and then being compelled by the president to actually become a public figure, which I was reluctant to be, trying to play a constructive role in these elections and share my views on what had happened and the risks for the country, and to play some sort of small role into, I guess, precipitating the outcome that I was hoping that we were going to have, which is ending the Trump administration, preventing 4 more years of potential catastrophe and putting this country on the road to some sort of normalcy.
Well, as we reflect on the 5 to 25 years of living that you did in the last 14 plus months, more than most will experience in a lifetime. It's worth also noting, of course, that in addition to being a decorated veteran, you are a scholar of Ukraine and Russia, and came to this country from Ukraine as a small child. So as you both experienced these issues, certainly on a personal level, and the politics both of this country and of Russia and Ukraine, and are familiar with how authoritarians operate. So as we think about this post-election environment in which we find ourselves, in which the president has not yet conceded, I'm curious to hear, based on your own knowledge of Eastern Europe, and especially of Russia and Ukraine, how you reflect on how this may resemble other authoritarian tendencies, and where you see the transition period taking us. How does this end, and does Russia offer a bit of a guidebook in some of what might be leading the president's actions?
I'll start off by saying it's pretty scary in certain regards. I know that we're very, very different from Russia. We have, kind of bedrock institutions that have allowed us to actually navigate the last 4 years as well as we have, in spite of a chief executive that was looking to, basically to advance his own interests, corrupt, everything he could that was a potential obstacle. So I know, the kinds of people that are in government that are helping us kind of, that helped us from going too far astray. And I'm very, I'm unbelievably happy that we have, we actually have the opportunity to correct the harm of the past 4 years. It's going to take an inordinate amount of time. The president has done a lot of damage, not just to institutions, but really to the kind of the fabric of our democracy. He continues to do it to this day. And the kinds of things that he's doing is, he's taking what he amounts to an enormous amount of support, some 72 million people, and continuing to kind of take some subcomponent of that's extremely activated and willing to pretty much believe anything the president says. And the kinds of risks that emerge from that are huge. I mean, I think that for the students of history, they should know that the Communist Party was a tiny minority of people in Russia in the Tsarist period, but they managed to institute a 70-year authoritarian regime. Same thing with frankly, the Nazis. It doesn't take a huge amount of people that are properly that are willing to use really any recourse, including violence, to achieve their aims to even overturn the will of the authority. So it's scary, but I get at the same time, I'm pretty hopeful about our institutions functioning properly. That's on the domestic front. On the international front, I think it's the standard fare of whataboutisms from our adversaries, authoritarian states. Well, who are you to preach to us about what we should be doing? Look at you ran kind of a corrupt election. That's going to be something that we just have to deal with. It's a reality. We also have to deal with the fact that the United States and probably has lost its luster to the international community. The fact that the authoritarian states in this world are increasingly challenging our democracies. They've, in certain ways, played a contributing role in undermining our democracies and putting President Trump in power. I'm not saying they were directly involved in the 2016 outcome, but they were involved in sowing the discord that set the conditions for the president to capitalize on. So I think we will be facing some enormous challenges to overcome domestically and overseas, and it's going to take more than just the president, the new president, President Trump, Biden, to come in. He's going to have to mobilize, frankly, democracy to push back on the assault by authoritarian regimes, and frankly, the even the shared common themes of ethnocentric nationalism, inequality, systemic racism that other countries experience, other types of legitimate grievances, and address those. And so that's a domestic issue and a foreign policy issue that I think the next administration is going to have to face. And that's still, some 60 days away that we have to survive the Trump administration and its death throes.
Yes, indeed. Well, as you note, that so many of these qualities are present in countries around the world that model this sort of behavior, that it's not just in the executive, but as you note, the ethno-nationalism, the lack of trust. As we think about some of these qualities, I'd like to ask you to turn and reflect on, as you note, there are legions of dedicated career civil servants and diplomats, people who wear our uniform and represent our country the world over, who have shown great courage, as you have throughout this presidency. There are others who have not, political and career alike. What is it about your own personal upbringing, about your own lens in interpretation of your values through your military career, that led you to make a different choice than some of your counterparts?
So I think there are, maybe I'll just break it up into two logical categories. There are the political actors that tend to get the bulk of the attention. I could say that there were at one point certainly service members. They still highly honorable individuals, but once they take a position, as a political appointee in a government, they're also become political actors. So the John Kellys of the world, the Jim Mattis's, honorable careers should be celebrated for their accomplishments. But I think, in my view, I think they did fail to take the opportunity to live up to their values, the values that they committed to 40 years of service to advance, and not take a stand with regards to the abuses of this administration. Then there are the multitudes of public servants that are still toiling away, without their lives being exposed, that are doing the right thing. I think what I would suggest is maybe what I kind of observed in my own stint at the White House and National Security Council. People have their jobs to do, and they're going to do the best they can in those jobs. Did I observe a number of other kinds of misdeeds occur while I was at the White House that were clearly outside of my portfolio? And did I kind of, have some expectation that my peers and counterparts were going to do the same thing? Yes, maybe some of them did or did not live up to it. But I guess in my situation, it was in my portfolio, it was my purview. I was responsible for this particular element, and I had a duty and an oath to uphold, and I was not going to shirk my responsibilities. So I think that, other military officers potentially could have taken the same position, and mine just happens. My lot is much more public, but there are plenty of people that are out there trying to do the right thing, trying to navigate the politicization of various branches of government, and make it through the next 60 days or so.
Yeah, Alex, I'm thinking about the many conversations that we've had together over the last couple of months, and there's something that you keep coming back to that I think is really important that I'd love for you to share with our audience here tonight, which is this notion of making courage a habit. And this is a theme of your forthcoming book, Here, Right Matters, which everybody should line up to purchase. What does it mean to make courage a habit? Because not everybody does. And I think this gets to some of the reforms I'd like to talk about as we think about future-proofing our institutions from these kinds of challenges. Could you help us explore that as a concept?
So I tried to kind of do a self-dissection to understand, how I managed to navigate, what was something that was way outside of my experience, and anything that I was at least in total equipped to handle. And what I thought about is the fact that throughout my life I've had a countless number of formative experiences. I can't pinpoint all of them, but I think as human beings we learn from our experiences, and certainly my upbringing and my father's influence was critical. I think my experience as an immigrant coming to the United States and having a different having a different kind of appreciation for this country, not in my lived experience, but certainly in understanding my father's and my family's lived experience in the Soviet Union, that this is different. That probably instilled in a impetus to serve. That during my military career, there are a set of military values. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage, the mnemonic devices, leadership. These are things that we try to instill in soldiers from all sorts of different backgrounds. I grew up in Brooklyn, kind of inner city type, not particularly harsh. I don't want to say that, it was like really rough, but we were a family that an immigrant family that was kind of struggling at points, and I probably grew up, in spite of my father, with some sort of view that the ends justify the means. That's certainly is not something that has stayed with me. I have a more kind of, although I understand the shades of gray, I have a more kind of set idea of what is acceptable and what erodes your kind of ethics and values. And that part of that, the military was important in shaping that. And then, there were other, we train our military officers to make on-the-spot corrections when they see something wrong. So it's a sum total of all these experiences, my time in combat, my time serving in the Soviet Union, the various, former Soviet Union and Russia, although it resembles it at times. It's the sum total of these experiences. And that's something that I try to do in the book, is I kind of go through these key moments and talk about the lessons I drew out of these experiences, personal loss that my wife and I have experienced and so forth. And all these in total allowed me to both make the right decision, but also do the right thing in the right way. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about kind of doing the right, making the call that, I need to report this to the proper authorities and testifying. It's, choosing not to go through some sort of, not going down the road of, let's say, somebody like Edward Snowden, who proceeded to provide his information to our adversaries. That's, even if he did the right thing, that wasn't the right way. It's just as an example. And then, one of the things that's interesting is my training to go to Moscow was probably pretty interesting, because in that training, I had some SEER training and how to resist kind of like interrogations and handle challenging environments, and that actually, and being just generally sensitive to your environment, and the fact that the White House and various partisans in the White House are closely scrutinizing my activities and looking for missteps. All these experiences were really important for me to navigate a very, very perilous period of time.
So in other words, your U.S. government training that prepared you to serve as an attaché in Russia ended up serving you well here when you found yourself toe-to-toe with the president. So this notion really that courage is a muscle, maybe, right? That you have talked about the need to exercise it constantly, to live those values all the time.
So that's, I'm glad you circled back around to this point. So I think this is a theme that could be helpful. It's something that I would want to instill in my daughter and in my communities, that even if you don't start out exactly where you want to be, but you have this aspiration to better yourself, you need to figure out what are the values that are important to you, and start exercising them as you do a muscle, and you build what I guess I refer to as muscle memory. You make those little corrections, you make the right kind of judgment calls, and then it becomes second nature. Mm-hmm. So when you're faced with extremely challenging, and really unprecedented and unforeseen challenges, you kind of you've exercised the muscle of ethics and values that really comes in handy and helps you through those difficult times.
Well, I think that's a great reminder for all of us that we have an opportunity to live our values every day. Maybe not in as stark relief as you were faced in circumstances of your not of your choosing, but a great reminder as we think about. So we've talked about these values on a personal level. How do you approach having confronted that with thinking about how we integrate those values culturally into our institutions? Which is to say, we've both talked about the bravery and courage of the many men and women in our who work in our institutions as federal employees, uniformed and otherwise. But should we have to rely on the fortitude of individuals? What could we do to build institutions that are more resilient to these kinds of attacks? Would love your thoughts.
Sure. So I would say that I don't think I have many of the answers that we need, but I could tell you that my colleagues and I, so Fiona Hill, Masha Ivanovich, Bill Taylor, have all thought about this space and how can we advocate for public service and advocate for public servants of integrity and value-driven decisions and so forth. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in the space. If this was a ripe space for activity prior to 2016, it's even more important that we apply resources and make gains on this kind of advocacy. I would say that from my background, I come from the military, and we do have a set of values and ethics. I think institutions can take a look and do a self-assessment and determine whether they have those values and ethics that they, if they have them, whether they're meeting their objectives in promoting those values. If they don't, then what are those institutional ethics that they want to advocate for? This seems to be kind of narrowly focused on government, but it doesn't have to be. Sure. You could also talk about, what is important to you in your community. If you're part of an organization, my wife is a Girl Scout troop leader. What is it that they have? The Girl Scouts obviously have their ethics and values, and there's something to kind of model off of. But this is something that, in the example that you asked me about, exercising the muscle, it's what is it that's important to you that you could start exercising on a regular basis. And once you start exercising it for yourself, it actually becomes an expectation for others. So that this could actually help on a broader scale when you start to look at your leadership, elected leadership, and whether they actually model the kinds of values and ethics that you want. I think it's telling that we have, a large number of people that are willing to cast aside ethics and values to maybe to advance some sort of policy objective, or to kind of, to identify that there is a grievance that's being not addressed. I don't think these things should be discounted. We have too large a segment of population that voted for the president. Some of them probably are irreconcilable. I mean, that might be true, that there are a large number, and again, out of 72 million, large number could mean, millions, but still that are, racist, white national racist. But I kind of refuse to believe it applies to everybody. I think there is a whole different set of grievance, probably has to do with inequality as a portion of it. The urban divide is something that I've been thinking about. What is it that the rural community is not getting that the urban community is getting? I think part of that is probably services are not being provided the way they need to be. I think there's more that needs to be done by government to explain some of the policies that are distasteful. Our involvement in 2 decades of war, what seem to be inequitable trade policies. All these things require more, explanation so that, people could make informed calls. Maybe they will not support it regardless. That's true, but at least there'll be an informed call. So there's a lot to do, I guess, in the space of advocating for ethics and leaderships and values, but it might start with, an individual, yourself.
I love that, Alex, because it's really, I think the message here, if we're catching this right, is that these values are accessible to everybody, that everybody has a role to play, just as your daughter and my children can step up in their own way, so too can people all across the country. You hit on something important I'd like to go to. Before I do that, I'd like to remind our listeners that you can start to populate questions that you have for Alex using the function within YouTube, and we'll be taking those questions in just a few minutes. So Alex, you talked about the importance of an informed citizenry. And one of the major features of this particular election, and which is evocative certainly of what happened in 2016, is the role that disinformation did play in shaping certain outcomes. As we think about an informed citizenry, increasingly a big part of what it means to be a citizen has some component of it, which is evaluating information and the quality of it. As we reflect on this particular election and see the disinformation campaigns in Florida with the Cuban and Venezuelan community in particular, that really clearly move the needle, curious for your thoughts, drawing upon your expertise from Russia and Ukraine, about what is disinformation, first of all, for our audience, and how is it used by governments? And as we think about the deep healing and work to be done in repairing our democracy, how might we approach tackling disinformation as a way towards fortifying our institutions anew?
I think I'll start with this notion that, you know, it's again, there's an element of individual responsibility, but it cannot be a solution of, you know, the expectation that Twitter or Facebook is going to filter out all the disinformation. We all probably need to be better consumers of information and understand what, you know, what looks suspect, what looks legitimate. It's interesting what you know, future historians will tell us about the outcome of the 2020 election. I think nobody really kind of foresaw or expected that huge shift in Florida, amongst the Cuban and Latin American community that reacted viscerally to this campaign that portrayed President-elect Biden as a socialist. Now, is there substance to it? No. But there was an effective information operation that painted President-elect Biden in that manner and lost him the state of Florida. Fortunately, he had a kind of a broader, more sweeping mandate, and you know, that's indicative of the fact that he basically turned the northern Midwestern states blue, but he also kind of won in Arizona and Georgia, and again, nobody expected it. I think it looks like a broader rejection of President Trump and the way he governed. But up until probably election day or a couple days before, everybody had considered Florida as a kind of linchpin, and I think, you know, certainly our adversaries, probably elements of the Trump campaign, also considered it that way, and micro-targeted communities there. It looks like there was a shift in communities of color also that show up or voted more heavily for President Trump than should be expected or could be expected based on his the way he's governed the past 4 years. So there's what does that mean? It probably means that various elements, probably including Biden's team, did not pay attention to the warning signs that there was a pretty robust information campaign going on. I think ultimately we will also learn that there are foreign powers. I'm out of government. I can't say this because I've seen something, but based on my having seen numerous things while I was in government, there was plenty to suggest that our adversaries were probably involved in some of these information campaigns, and they will be. And they will be because they see it as a low-cost, high-value activity to target the United States, to target existing. We shouldn't. Again, this is why we can't discount the fact that there are 72 million people that have voted for President Trump. They're targeting existing seams between our population, and looking to exploit those, looking to fracture those seams, and you know, to achieve a kind of outcome. So I think that they will continue to pursue these kinds of tactics until such time that, you know, the U.S. and the West choose to respond, maybe even reciprocally. There's a policy recommendation there where if we can table that one, but yeah.
Do you want to go there a little bit? Because
we can, sure.
I mean, look, we've got this environment in which we're going to have a new Secretary of Defense, and I don't just mean potentially additionally before the end of the Trump administration, but we
Right.
will have a new Secretary of Defense under the Biden administration. And there's a question that's emerging, which is we have the world's largest military, the largest military budget, cresting what we're about $800 billion. Larger than the next several militaries combined. The Russians have a far smaller operation. There are signs that the Colombians and Venezuelans may have also put their thumb on the scales, in Florida in particular. As you note, high yield, low cost. Is our military properly aligned against the threat environment that we face, not just on disinformation? But we could talk about COVID as a major national security threat. Where do our resources need to be, and are they really truly aligned for the threat environment that we face?
So this is an area that I worked on extensively while I was on the chairman's staff, on the joint staff. So I had the privilege of being the lead author for something called the Global Campaign Plan for Russia. And what this plan was is to look at kind of day to day, everything outside of actual war fighting. The military spends an enormous amount of resources for this contingency, low probability contingency of having to fight a major war with a near peer. That's why we have, F-22s, F-35s, aircraft carriers. Those are essential. But there's also a different kind of competition that's going on in terms of this competition for below the level of armed conflict in the information space, in cyberspace. And I would advocate that the next secretary look much more closely at this idea of campaigning and what we need to do below this level of kind of armed conflict. Now, what I guess I'm suggesting is I'm not by any means looking to discard our values or kind of to stoop to our adversaries' level and engage in kind of nefarious activities. I think there's plenty in America's history to suggest that we may have done that to our detriment. What I'm suggesting is that we live in the real world, and in the real world, while advancing our kind of ideological and cultural proclivity for democracy and advancing the interests of democracy, transparency, good governance, we also have to add an element of realism to that. And what that might suggest is that, in order to achieve deterrence, prevent our adversaries from using these tools against us, we also need to kind of look at reciprocity and reciprocal steps. So if the Russians feel unencumbered about interfering in U.S. affairs, we might need to take a look at, similar, with warning. We tell the Russians that we're prepared to do the same thing, and they might accuse us of doing that now, but in reality, we haven't. We haven't been promoting color revolutions. We've been advocating for democracy, but we've not been interfering in internal affairs. We have not really pursued this idea of cyber attacks. If we've done it defensively, we also haven't used information operation to attack a Russian or regime interests. That could be something that we need to take a much more careful and closer look at in the next administration to, again, achieve deterrence. And then we go back to our kind of more normative behavior of being the good guy and playing by the rules. But our adversaries are not, and it's a tough place to be, but that's where we might have to go.
So we're going to start to turn to the questions that are building from our audience here. Lots of questions from which to choose. Let's start with Stephen Leach. Hi, Stephen. He asks, can there be accountability for the misbehavior to which you have alluded for the outgoing administration? What safeguards can be enhanced or put into place to limit such action in the future? So do we take these folks to court? This is a big question countries have to answer in the aftermath of controversial authoritarian leaders. What's your take?
Sure. Thanks, Stephen, for that question. I think, I would have found myself a couple of years ago advocating for, as I did actually in the case of Ukraine, that President Zelensky and his administration not pursue kind of some sort of vindictive effort to punish his predecessor Poroshenko, and that a part of the hallmark of a functional democracy is a peaceful transfer of power, and as long as there is not explicitly illegal activity, don't try to go after your predecessors, because you're really setting yourself up for kind of the same pattern to play out after you leave office. I would say that my thinking has evolved and then evolved again. It first evolved to this notion that we need accountability for this administration and for egregious wrongdoings. And again, what's in the public space is frankly only the tip of the iceberg. I think the Department of Justice would have its hands full with seeking to redress a whole host of issues with the Trump administration, and I think the Trump administration is mindful of that. But I also think that you could do that. You could kind of expose wrongdoing and not necessarily automatically pursue punishment. It might be a good exercise in good governance to expose the wrongdoing, take measures to prevent similar wrongdoing into the future, but not necessarily target all but the most egregious actors, because what you're doing is you're basically those 72 million voters that voted for President Trump, you're adding a major grievance to them. I think that's a decision that the federal government's going to have to make. There's going to be a much simpler decision by state governments that are going to pursue this regardless. They will pursue tax fraud, tax evasion, and a whole host of other things that the federal government is not going to have to even step into. If this administration ends up with a host of pardons for the Trump family, they're not going to be able to do that for the state cases that are likely to move forward. So I think there's a whole host. There's another opportunities. There's a number of opportunities to kind of address the wrongdoing. I think we just need to be careful, because again, as large a margin as President-elect Biden won by, it looks like it's going to be some 6 million votes, which is a very large margin, actually, in terms of American elections. And as large a margin as he won by in the Electoral College, you don't need to add to the division and the extreme polarization by doing something that comes across as politically motivated.
So we turn now to the World Affairs Council of San Antonio. And they ask, what is your forecast about what will happen in Belarus and the movement there and the conflict in the Caucasus? So this is squarely in your wheelhouse here.
So it's interesting. I'll just be frank and say that I think that the Caucasus, the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh has largely played out. What I mean by that is that there was a enormous imbalance between the power that the Azeris were aggregating, the investments that they were making in defense, buying really high-tech systems, and what was decisive in this particular military campaign were unmanned aerial vehicles, and what the Armenians were doing. And the Azeris saw an opportunity and established facts on the ground. They seized an enormous amount of territory, and then in negotiations, negotiated for the remainder of the territory that they were looking for, leaving what amounted to probably an acceptable, ultimately, not in the short term, because there's going to be a lot of issues with how the Pashinyan government handled the conflict, but in the long term, establishing a kind of acceptable solution where the ethnically Armenian sections of Nagorno-Karabakh, Stepanakert, and so forth are going to be preserved, and Armenian ethnically Armenian territories with a corridor that allows access to and from. So this leads, this kind of in a certain way leads to a permanent solution. I think. Again, Pashinyan is going to face some serious challenges. He's a democratically elected leader. stepped in after a host of non-democratically elected leaders, and I think he's likely to be swept aside. I think there's a danger that there's some sort of reversal for democracy in Armenia as a result of these losses. I would be cautious about. And clearly, Russia is going to benefit because they're also they'll have some 1,600 troops stationed in as peacekeeping forces. That adds to already their basing in Armenia, and they'll be further entrenched there. I think in a way, ultimately, if you set aside the difficult question of the Armenian genocide, there was some progress being made, about a decade ago, towards normalizing relationships with Turkey. That ended up falling apart largely because of the fact that there was this longstanding conflict with Azerbaijan and Nagorno-Karabakh. Now that Nagorno-Karabakh is in certain ways likely to be resolved, you actually have an opportunity for Armenia to normalize relationships with Turkey, open up that border, and this could be it could be in a way a windfall for Armenia with regards to expanded trade and being less isolated. So that's one kind of view on, and then of course there's still a lot of tension between Russia and Georgia. Moving on to Belarus. There's kind of almost a ring of instability around Russia. It's unprecedented since at least the 90s, where you have significant tensions non-favorable to Russia. Belarus is another example. There's an internal unrest in the far west, in the far east, in Khabarovsk, lovely city, by the way. I had a chance to visit. That has to do with basically the will of the population to have their kind of locally elected leader that did not necessarily align with with Putin and his elites' views on where that region should be going. Belarus. So to close out on Belarus, I think this is, in a lot of ways, reached expectations. It didn't get resolved quickly. I didn't expect it to. I foresaw that it was going to be a long kind of standing conflict between the population and and Lukashenko and his security elites. Unfortunately, time tends to favor because you have the population kind of gets tired of protests without seeing any results. There's a risk that Lukashenko could hang on. I think with the Biden administration, however, there could be more concerted pressure put on, that looks for off ramps. Where Lukashenko is not, even though he's considered the last dictator in Europe, or so, that he's not brought to trial per se and sits in jail or something like that. There are some off ramps that could be looked at that might be amenable to both Russia, because the Belarusian population still actually is supportive of Russia, but transitions away from Lukashenko. And the U.S. could play a constructive role. I have this view that the U.S. should be a leader in advancing the interests of democracy, primarily probably amongst the both existing and struggling democratic states, and then more further afield promoting the view of democracy, but without seeking regime change, because regime change is destabilizing and you don't know where you're going to end up. So I think the U.S. should fill that role, and there might be some thoughts that I put out here in the next couple of weeks on that.
We have a teaser. So I won't ask you about Russia under a Biden administration. We'll wait to see that in print. So as we think about what this means for the next administration, and certainly a full inbox for the president-elect, no doubt, this brings to mind kind of what is next for you, Alex. You have a book coming out around Memorial Day, just in time for I think a deep beach read, right? And I know will be of interest to World Affairs Councils around the country. But what is next for you as you look to the future?
Now, I'm happy to address that, but you mentioned this idea of a full plate for Biden, so I won't miss the opportunity to mention that. There's a very full plate domestically in handling the challenges that have existed even before the Trump administration, but certainly have been kind of inflated and multiplied by the Trump administration. And there are a host of challenges that, internationally. And I think some of the solutions applicable domestically to address these concerns that you've heard me talk about, again, ethnocentric nationalism, inequality, the way that globalization has benefited some and not others. I think those solutions, as we look for solutions domestically, those will be applicable to our closest allies and our fellow democracies that are facing similar challenges. And what I would hope to see is that the Biden administration take a leadership role in assembling the democracies of the world, to strengthen them, and again to resist the assault by authoritarian states that just by the nature of the existence of democracy are threatened. Even if we don't do anything, the reality is that even if we don't do anything, if we chose to be more isolationist, that wouldn't somehow eliminate the threats coming from our adversaries. We still exist as a democracy. We just put ourselves in a weaker position to challenge that. With regards to me, I am wrapping up my first semester at SAIS, working on
places. We've got an audience around the country here.
Sure. Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. I'm working on a doctorate and finishing up my first semester of coursework. I'm focused on great power competition. So what is it our biggest challengers, Russia, China, are doing to undermine U.S. national security interests? What should we be doing in response? I'm taking a look at contested space like Belarus and Ukraine. It's still early stages, but that's conceptually this is where I'm looking at. And then same thing in looking at contested space between Russia and China and Central Asia, and contested space between us and the Chinese in the Pacific region, South China Sea, East China Sea, and then trying to see if I could continue to contribute to the policy discussion from the academic space. I'm also I just recently joined the Lawfare Institute as a Pritzker military fellow. I'm pretty happy to have that kind of support from the Pritzker Military Foundation. It allows me to work on the book projects, the writing, the speaking, and so forth. I am a non-resident fellow at Perry Worldhouse, and then I try to talk in kind of either large or small venues to people about public service and advocating for the things I think I try to articulate on my very first day out of uniform, which is honorable leadership, an election outcome, which we have now, fortunately, value-based and ethical leadership, and then public service. So that's and spending more time with family and all that.
Yes, and a wonderful family you have indeed. That is a full dance card. And so as we wrap up our time here, let's close with your thoughts on public service. It seems we have an opportunity here, to return to some of that. Would love to hear your thoughts on public service in general, and the role that you see for others, and perhaps a calling to our young people who are out there watching us this evening.
So I mean, I guess it's important to understand that there are different kinds of service. Service is anything that's not oriented on yourself or advancing your own interests, but it's externally oriented on, frankly, as something as simple as your community, what you can do for your community to improve your own local community. That could be volunteering in schools, volunteering as a mentor to young people. I think these are all invaluable. I mean, the former service I chose and the former service you chose earlier in your career were serving in government as public servants, and for me as a military officer. Certainly those are viable. I would hope that there was an opportunity for this administration to advocate for public service and look at kind of opportunities to maybe address some issues like enormous student loan debts by trading off, paying off those debts by spending some years in public service. That seems like it would be a kind of a win-win for both U.S. society as well as for somebody that is looking to get out from under large student debts. So I think it also should be recognized that in service, you're advancing one of those values that I alluded to earlier and exercising that muscle that you might want to do to exercise to overcome challenges in the future. So I think I would look at service as a venue to exercise values and better yourself and so forth.
Well, Alex, I can think of no more fitting place on which to end. Thank you for your service and for your courage and your strong leadership. It's been a pleasure and an honor speaking with you here tonight. Bill?
Jenna, I commend you as a facilitator of this discussion. I'm so glad to meet you in person. We will do that sometime, I'm sure. The Truman Center and their community leaders of 1,700 or so, I understand, veterans, frontline civilians, and political and policy experts. We would like to work with you at your chapters around the country when you engage at state and local level with World Affairs Councils too, if that's possible. I'd love to explore that with you. And Alex, so inspired by you. I can't wait to read your book, Here Matters. I'm sure, as Jenna said, our councils would love to engage with you. Making courage a habit is a great message. I think also courage is the cousin of truth, which you stood for. Truth has been in such extreme short supply, even by Washington standards these recent years. And may we get to a better truth and more courageous country as we think about America's role in the world going forward. Tomorrow, folks, we have another busy day at our national conference. Starting at 2 o'clock, we're featuring yet another think tank briefing. You won't want to miss it. Women of Color Advancing Peace, Security, and Conflict Transformation, WCAPS. At 4 o'clock, we're presenting the Harvard Belfer Center's report, U.S. Diplomatic Service for the 21st Century, with former WACA Chairman Mark Grossman, Nick Burns, and Marcy Reese, 3 former ambassadors of note. We will celebrate with a virtual cocktail or a real cocktail in a virtual environment our Chairman's Leader of the Year. We won't tell you who that is, so you have to show up at 7 for that. And at 7:45, the Foreign Policy Association's sponsored program, The Global Economic Outlook, What's Ahead for 2021, with Jeff Garden and Abby Joseph Cohen. It's a big agenda. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Again, Jenna and Alex, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate your spending time.